If you've been here before, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, my name is Avon Van Hassel. I write fairy tale retellings and historical fantasy, and the first 3 books of my series, The Beanseller Saga, are available on Amazon for Kindle and paperback, and of course I'm on all the socials. All the links are down in the description. Today we're going to be talking about something that's actually very far from my heart. Being in Southern California, I'm very much of that hippie leftist, not quite a pacifist, but I'm not a big fan of the boom boom stick. However, they do play a role in my books, and because of the time period that my stories are set in and the lives that my characters lead, it's kind of difficult to avoid them. So they do play a role. Both of my main characters have their signature weapons that they use, and so I had to do quite a bit of research on the history and the use of them, and what the different things do and why you would choose one over another. So I thought it would be fun, just from a historical curiosity perspective, to have a little bit of a little paddle in the pool of firearm history. So this is not a deep dive. This is not I'm not an expert by any means. I've never fired a gun. So this is not going to be a treatise on how to use or acquire such items. This is just a general, very shallow overview of the history and the general mechanics if you are interested in having this type of historical weapon in your writing. This is just kind of like a jumping off point for more research and to kind of have a little bit of a play with maybe inventing your own, as I have. So yeah, hopefully it'll be fun, and let's get started. So the earliest sort of firearms that we have are called fire lances, and they come from China in the 10th century, and they were essentially paper or bamboo tubes. They were full of gunpowder, and they were just sort of pointed at the enemy and set on fire, and so they're basically flamethrowers. And then a few centuries later, they started to add projectiles to them, and that was the advent of what we call a hand cannon. So that was around the 13th century. By the 15th century, this had spread to Europe in the form of a device called the arquebus. I'm almost certain I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I'm gonna go with it anyway, so if I'm wrong, sorry. This is the first weapon that is recognizably a gun. It had a shoulder stock, it had a long metal barrel, it had a priming pan, it had a matchlock, which is an ignition system that's basically a long fuse that you would use to light the powder, which is kind of funny because you just have this lit rope just swinging around causing chaos. But crucially, the arquebus was the first weapon that had a trigger, and that's really important for the evolution of the gun. So from the arquebus, we have the musket, which the musket is the backbone of Western firearms for a long, long time. It's more or less, there was a matchlock gun before there was a flintlock gun. Musket is a flintlock gun, and I'll explain what that is in a second. And those are basically the replacements for bow and arrow. Now, bows and arrows, of course, continue to be used. They do continue to be used. I myself have 2 bows. So, archery is still a thing. But in terms of, hunting or military or, personal protection, the musket was it. So this is a musket with all of the different parts labeled for you. And the way you would load a musket is we're going to assume we have a paper cartridge, right? So you rip off the top of the paper cartridge, you pour a little bit of the powder into the pan, you put the little cap down on it, and then you pour the rest of it down the muzzle, right? So you turn it over so the butt is on the ground, and you pour it into the muzzle, and then you wad up the paper and stick it down there with the ball, the musket ball, which is a lead ball. This is important later. Then you pull out the ramrod and you pack it all down. Then you put the ramrod back. That's important. Don't shoot your ramrod. You can, but you shouldn't. Then when you're ready, you pull the hammer back 1 click That's called half-cocked. So when you're running off half-cocked, that's like you're not really prepared for anything, but you're on your way anyway. You close the lid of the priming pan, so you have to make sure that's closed. And then to fire, you pull the hammer back one more time and pull the trigger. And what that does is the hammer is like this, and it's got a little piece of flint in there. It strikes the frizzen, which creates a spark that falls into the pan, and then that creates the right, because it ignites the gunpowder. And that shoots the musket ball. And that's how you fire a musket. I'm going to illustrate all of that in a little bit. Not with an actual musket, my gosh, but with something else. And but if you still need a little bit more, there's a ton of videos on how to do it on YouTube. I've watched many of them, so they're very good. That's also what the flintlock system is. So instead of having the matchlock, which is a long match with the burning end to ignite the powder, you have it actually like does it itself. It's like built-in flint and steel. And then sometimes you would have a bayonet, which is basically a dagger on a ring that fits on the end, on the muzzle of the musket. And that's basically, at that point, it's basically a gun spear. So you can actually charge the enemy with it. So that's the musket. Now, I don't have any rifles in my books yet, but it's kind of difficult to talk about muskets and not talk about rifles. So I'm going to go into this just really quick. So the main problem with a musket is that they are wildly inaccurate. They're okay in close range, but at wider distances or longer distances, they're wildly inaccurate. So in order to fix that, they developed the rifle. And this was actually inspired by archery, because archers discovered that if they put their fletching, the feathers, in a kind of in spiral shape, they actually flew straighter. And so they kind of had that same idea with the rifling, which is kind of a spiral groove inside the barrel of this new gun, which had been a musket and is now going to be a rifle. So what happens is, when the flint strikes the frizzen and it ignites the powder, the expansion of gases inside the barrel of the musket, it pushes the ball out, right? But the ball is too small for the barrel, and so it kind of bounces along as it's going out, and that eats up a lot of energy. So when it comes out, it doesn't have as much power as it should. So with the rifling, those spiral grooves inside, the ball sort of expands a little bit and expands into those grooves, and so it spirals also, and so it gets this kind of really good spin on it, so that it goes a lot straighter when it comes out. Now the rifle was not, at this point, the rifle was not like the weapon that everybody used. Riflemen were like an elite group, and the musketeers, not musketeers, but musketmen or whatever, were kind of your everyday soldier. And part of this is because of these grooves that had to be pretty precise. Making rifles was a lot more time intensive. It was a lot more expensive. And so it was better to have elite groups that were trained than to just outfit everybody, because also the amount of time it took to train people to do it properly was also kind of time intensive. Also, it took a lot longer to load a rifle than it took to load a musket. So your entire army is a lot slower now. So just as a breakdown, and I'm going to consult my tablet here because there's a lot of math. I'm going to try to put it up on the screen if I remember. So if your rifleman can shoot 2.5 shots per minute, a good one could shoot 3, but most people are averaging about 2. So we'll say 2.5 to be kind. 2.5 shots per minute with a rifle. You could get 4 shots per minute with a musket. And they said that you could get 6 shots with a bow and arrow in the length of time it took a musketeer, musketman, to load his muskets. 24 arrows per minute with an archer. Alright, so keep those numbers in mind. 2.5 shots per minute with a rifle, 4 shots per minute with a musket, and 24 shots per minute with a bow. Now the accuracy. Muskets have up to like a 48% accuracy at 200 yards and 18% at 300 yards, which is not good. Rifles have 58% at 300 yards and 42% at 500 yards. So a bit better. And I can't really provide the numbers on archery because there are so many factors that go into like the accuracy, because you have things like wind, you have altitude, you have the skill of the archer, you have how fast the target's moving. There's a lot that goes into the accuracy of a bow. But the third factor we need to consider is the ammunition itself. So it actually takes a lot of training to make arrows. They're called fletchers, are the people who make arrows. That's where that name comes from. A fletcher is someone who in the past made arrows. So you need a lot of training. It takes a lot of work to make them straight. You can't just do like in the Robin Hood cartoon and just have any old twig and shoot it and it'll work. There's actually a lot of precise science behind making arrows, and you have to be skilled to do it. And it's very time consuming, and it's, a lot of resources and all that because they come from wood, right? Whereas musket balls, and rifles used musket balls as well, you could just pick those back up off the battlefield and melt them down and reform them into musket balls over like a campfire. There are these little, like, they look like tongs, right? But on the end there's a ball, and those were musket ball molds, essentially. So you would have your little crucible, your little ceramic thing. You put your smashed up musket balls in there. You heat them over the fire. Lead has a really low melting point. And then you pour it into your little molds, and you can make a couple of musket balls at night at camp. So, and it takes a lot less skill. You don't need to find a fletcher to make more musket balls. You can do it yourself. That's part of the reason why muskets and rifles became so popular. So now we're going to get into the smaller versions. We're getting into blunderbusses and pistols. Now blunderbusses, we really associate those with pirates, because if it's a fun word to say, and you want something a bit more swashbuckling than pistol, even though pistols were also very popular, and popular with highwaymen as well, of the era. So the era being the late 1700s, early 1800s, so we're talking about American Revolution time, or like the Georgian era in Britain, the Napoleonic era everywhere else. But yeah, so it's that late 1700s, early 1800s area. So the blunderbuss it's not a progression of the musket or the rifle, it's sort of a cousin of the arquebus. It's shorter, it's stockier, and it makes the most god-awful cacophony. It's more a descendant of the hand cannon than of the arquebus. They have a similar ancestor. They have the same ancestor, but they went in different directions. So the main point of the blunderbuss is how loud it is and how versatile it is. So it's short, it's stocky. The term actually basically translates to thunderbox, with a little bit of like added confusion. The blunder comes from added confusion because of just how disorienting it is. But it's also adapted to shoot pellets, so shot. But you can also put a ball down there, but it basically, you can load that thing with anything and it'll just fire any kind of projectile, honestly. Anywhere from a musket ball to a handful of gravel, it all works. So then we have the dragons, or the dragoons, which are basically an even shorter blunderbuss. They're a pistol version of a blunderbuss. And a part of why it was called a dragon wasn't just because of how loud it was, but because people tended to like carve dragons into the barrel, which was actually really cute. I think that's just like a trend that they had for a while. So those are the main guns that you're going to see in this time period. So in my books, Alois carries a pair of dragons, and Sulat has a blunderbuss, and they both have swords as well. Alois is a better swordsman, but Sulat is a better shot. And so because of that, Alois tends to prefer close-up fighting, close quarters fighting, and Sulat prefers to fight from a distance. She's also much smaller than he is, so she prefers she prefers to either fire from a distance to protect herself or to like create a lot of chaos so she can get away. So that's kind of their two fighting styles and why they prefer the guns that they do. Alois also has in his possession somewhere what is called an Etten gun that I invented. So in his backstory, there was a war, and it was a war between the humans in this kingdom and a race of giants that had been pushed down out of the mountains. And they were pushed out for reasons not necessarily of their fault, but what changed it from just a refugee crisis to an actual war is that when they came down, they were also very violent, and the humans needed to defend themselves. And so there was a war. And in this war, they had an elite regiment who were the Etineers. And Alois was one of them. And so he has what's called an Etin gun, which is a cross between an elephant gun, which is actually a much later, much more recent invention. It was developed when the Western world kind of steamed into Africa to colonize it, and they got really into big game hunting. So this was developed in that kind of like later 1800s area, but it's got a lot of power behind it, so it's good for taking down large animals. And I also found these Napoleonic era, and from all of my research, they're real, 4-barrel pistols. It's a brace, so 2 pistols with 4 barrels. And they're not like the peppermill, like they don't rotate. They're actually just 4 barrels. So the Etin gun is a 4-barrel elephant gun, essentially. So it has a lot of kick, and you have to be careful because if you don't load it correctly, 1 or more barrels can explode, which was also a problem with muskets. They had a tendency to, not only were they inaccurate, but they had a tendency to backfire sometimes. So yeah, that was a fun time that I had inventing a new gun for this particular war. Obviously Alois doesn't get a lot of use out of it now that the war is over and the majority of his fighting is done with other humans. It's a bit excessive, so he tends to just stick to his swords and his pistols, like a proper highwayman should. So while we're on the topic of blunderbusses, I had to tell you guys this little story, and this is my little show and tell moment. So a few years ago, about 10 years ago, when I was, actually, gosh, it was 11 years ago. My gosh, it was a long time ago. When I first started writing Magic Beans, I was, a couple of my friends were getting married, and I was staying with them because they're British, so I had to be there for a while to be there for the wedding. And so when the bride went on her hen do, we basically just were going around Bath in England and just kind of being a menace generally. And at one point, this friend, by the way, she's a big fan of the Sharp series, the Sean Bean series from the 80s, I want to say, which was all about Napoleonic Wars. So she was kind of my touchstone and my expert for all of my gun and military questions. And so we were just wandering around, and she was trying to explain to me about guns because she knows more than I do. And we went into this candy store because we were in our late 20s and we wanted candy. So we were just wandering around, and all of a sudden she found this. And she was like, actually, this is reasonably accurate. So I have to show you guys. So she was showing me all the bits. So obviously we have the muzzle here with the barrel, and we have the stock and the butt. But here we have the pan and the frizzen, which does go up and down, and we have the hammer. And it does go half cock, full cock. Gotta close the pan. And so you can actually see, can you see it? There's actually like a little piece, like there's flint in there. Originally it had some kind of Runts candy in it or something. My sister bought me these silver balls that she thought was very funny, and I was like, that is funny. So now it's just, you would not have this many musket balls in a blunderbuss or a pistol. I'm not really sure. I think this is supposed to be a blunderbuss because it was very piratey themed, but it's kind of blunderbuss shaped but pistol sized. So I'm not really sure what it's meant to be specifically, but I had to show you guys my candy toy. This is the closest thing I own to a gun. yeah, so that's a little exploration of firearms and how they appear in my world and how they might appear in your world. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you would like a deep dive into a historical firearm. I will do it for you. I'm not going to buy a gun, but I will research for you if you want me to. And yeah, let me know if it piques your interest at all. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.